and distinguished. Good evening, dear eminent leaders and distinguished participants. Manish Singh and I will be anchoring today's Future Fit Leadership Series. Welcome you all to the Feed Friday Future Fit Leaders Series. As we are about to start the session, we request your support towards making it a well-organized and well-recorded session. At the same, I request everyone except today's guest and anchor to kindly mute your microphone and switch off your cameras. Also request you all to fill in the form as shared in the chat box. It is important to gather your valuable feedback and incorporate your suggestions. Make the series more interesting, engaging, and rewarding. Please do post your questions in the chat box during the conversation, asking our guest speaker to answer. Thanks. We appreciate your support. Let me briefly discuss the Future Fit Leadership Series, scheduled on every Friday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. We invite highly regarded business thinkers, business leaders, involving CEOs, CHROs, and CXOs across industries and sectors to share their insights into the future. We define the new paradigm that will revolutionize business and leadership. The idea of Future Fit Leadership Series is conceived, designed, and developed by Future Lista Consulting Partners, a boutique consulting and management research firm committed to creating future-ready organizations. It provides the entire spectrum of HR services and solutions and works with the clients as their transformational partners. All the past episodes of the series are available on our website, www.futurelista.in. You can view them. Now, business with a cause, that has been always in our mind when we started the business, that we must have a cause too. That has led to the collaboration of Future Lista with Safe Foundation. Safe Foundation is a non-profit organization which works towards building an inclusive ecosystem for persons with disabilities and empower them to become productive contributors of our society. Now, I think now it's time to begin our conversation, and I am privileged to introduce our esteemed guest, Mr. Manmohan Singh Kalsy. Manmohan Singh Kalsy is a human resource professional with 30 years of proven experience in business partnering and organization building capabilities across FMCG, telecom, technology, and outsourcing industry. He had served on the board of Xerox India as a whole-time director and is a highly experienced in governance roles. He has been serving as the head of human resources functions at the United Breweries Limited since 2013 and has currently moved to an advisor role at United Breweries. Manmohan is an MBA and he has worked across various HR and leadership roles at the most admired companies like DCM, Gillette, Pepsi, Airtel, Vodafone, Xerox, which has supported him gaining a sound understanding of HR trends and issues. Manmohan serves on the advisory board of Chandigarh University, and he is a part of CII and various state government committees to advise on matters of labor, wages, safety, and HR issues. I don't want to take much time on introduction and all. Without taking much more time, let's start our conversation with Mr. Kalsy. Welcome you, Mr. Kalsy, and let's start our conversation. So it is
Thanks, Anirudh, and thanks for a very lengthy introduction.
Thank you.
After things, one of the few people who started working in the 80s. Extremely happy to be here. I have tuned into your previous sessions, particularly the last one between Anand and Rajiv was extremely insightful. So I'm really looking forward to the interaction, and whatever I can add from my own experience, I'll be very happy to do so.
Welcome, sir. Mr. Kalsy, as we prepare to drive off the road onto the unfamiliar terrain that lies ahead, it becomes very clear that we are going to require a new kind of vehicle, some very different driving skills, and a whole new sense of direction. But even more fundamentally, we will need to change all our personal and organizational assumptions about the world we are heading into. A very different world that is defined in a word called VUCA or tuna. In short, what I'm trying to say is that we need to reimagine, rethink about the future. And when I'm saying rethinking the future is about replacing the old mindset, which was like the idea. The old mindset was a kind of idea that we could, to some extent, control, order, and predict the future. With a new mindset based on the discontinuous changes. So it's discontinuous changes, not it's extension of the past, extension of the present, but it's a complete discontinuation of the future. It is about accepting the disruption as a norm. It is no more exploration of the present.
Right.
So, what are your views on seismic shifts which are happening, the mega trends, and driving these massive exponential disruptive changes?
Okay, Anirudh, I think firstly, we borrowed this term VUCA also from the military or the army, that just as the word organization came from, the defense and the military side of society. VUCA was created to discuss the aftermath when the Soviet Union was falling down, so late is early 90s. So even that's irrelevant, because last 20 years, people have taken the theme of VUCA and tried to create strategies and have business plans ready, trying to look into future. And obviously what the pandemic has done is, fast-tracked so many changes that you don't just need a new vehicle and new skills, but also be mindful of very different terrain where you're going to be racing. It's not just that you've got an F1 car and there is a circuit in which you have to race a very high-powered car. You perhaps now need to take the same car and navigate your way through the mountains on bends and climbs, which are unfamiliar terrain. So the disturbance which has been caused is far wider, has far deeper consequences that we could perhaps imagine, and will require organizations to really, look at a couple of things internally to stay relevant. A couple of things which I personally believe will help organizations to stay on track, factoring these seismic changes and the changes of the track, vehicle, etc. One is, post-pandemic, your vision can't be the same that, you've treasured for, say, 10, 20 years. That may not be relevant. When you mentioned about, challenging the mindset, whether it's a control mindset or the way you look at your organization, I think the starting point is going to be whether, the vision you had, that where you want to reach, with reference to the ambition of the corporation or the company is still relevant, or you need to amend that. So that's the starting point, because vision, as you know, is not just a statement of ambition where to reach, but also serves as a compass to people, because individuals also have their personal ambitions, and when they match, the journey is far better and mutually beneficial to both the company and the employees. The second bit, which is beyond ambition, is the purpose of the firm, the organization. And when we say purpose, it encompasses many, many things. And particularly to an employee, what is of relevance is what are the values, and not values which are plastered on the walls of the company, right from the reception down to the walkway to the pantry and so on and so forth. But the actual behavior of the top leaders is more often than not interpreted as the real values of the company versus the stated value. So you have to redefine vision, have a common understanding about the purpose of the organization, because I think the sensitivity individuals will have post-pandemic regarding their own personal values will be of a very higher order. And in that, there will be dilemmas of whether my personal values are in sync with the organization values, etc. And therefore, the clarity around purpose is also extremely important. I think the third bit, which companies have not really focused as much, or I would say not all companies have focused as much, is the bit about understanding. And it's not about understanding your customer, your consumer, your technology, your marketplace, etc. It's the understanding of people issues in terms of why their behaviors are what they are currently, because people have been through a lot. There's so much of crisis happening all the time, all around us. People have gone through personal issues, they've seen sufferings in the society, with friends, etc. And therefore, the company has to demonstrate a higher understanding of this, of not just behaviors, but also of people's anxieties, which will perhaps not always be expressed or spoken or said, but the organizations need to find ways to kind of pick up and decode these signs of anxieties, and they're bound to happen because, and you know, being part of the HR fraternity, we haven't really looked at this side as much as we should have earlier, and we were far more transactional. But I think going forward, this will not be just a HR mandate, but the organizations will seek to look deep and have a higher understanding of people's behaviors and their anxieties. I think the fourth thing which people will seek from any organization they choose to partner in their career journey would be the clarity. And while you could correlate it with the vision and the purpose elements, but I think beyond vision, beyond purpose, there is a clarity which people seek in order to build a two-way trust. You know, it encompasses the connections that you have in the organizations, not necessarily the formal reporting relationships on org charts, etc., but the kind of networks which exist in the company and the processes which enable these. And I think clarity provides a lot of connect with individuals to stay on the journey. And the last thing that I think organizations will need to bring in is a very often spoken term of agility. Now you could say agility, I would say adaptability. You know, the ability of the organization, as you said, to question the status quo. Now, whether you're willing to question traditional hierarchies, are you willing to see an organization beyond a traditional organization structure and see what are better ways of working, right? And I think the biggest change which will happen is far more accountability will come in for every single role holder, as the privilege of being long will no longer serve the purpose. So far we have given premium to tenure, to seniority of age, grade, titles, etc., which are not going to be as relevant as they used to be. So to answer you, yes, the companies will need to make significant shifts. Cosmetic changes will not serve. Cosmetic changes may make you happy to feel, yes, I have an alternate plan, but whether it will deliver the desired results and more importantly, will bring in the desired behavioral changes will only happen when you significantly repair and amend your ways of working in the organization.
Manmohan, let me pick up where you left and probe it a little deeper. So you said that the starting point is the vision. The vision cannot remain same in this VUCA which was earlier in 20th century or whatever.
Right.
And then values, and you talked about the purpose and the clarity, adaptability. In order to stay relevant.
Yes.
And these changes have to be deep changes, not cosmetic one.
Yes.
Now, if let's little bit go a bit deeper. So I said that how will the today's organizations develop a sense of foresight about where it needs to be heading and how it create a meaningful vision, I would say. Not just vision, but a meaningful vision and a purpose, a goal that is uniquely its own, and that will give it a sustainable competitive advantage, something that it can stand for in a crowded and confusing world. Of course, as you mentioned, this vision also have to have meaning to the people who are working there. Yeah. It's writing on the paper or the walls, a vision, a grand vision won't serve a purpose unless it resonates and it has a meaning to the people. How they can carve out a vision that they can stand out this crowded and confusing world?
So I think it's a great point you make. And first and foremost, response I'd like to make is that, the life expectancy of any strategy or any business plan is declining very, very fast. So one study which Nuremberg did is that from an average of 33 months that a business plan was relevant and was capable of giving the company a competitive advantage is now less by at least 6 months to 27 months. This is what their research has shown. And therefore, the life expectancy of your legacy structures, legacy plans, the age-old strategy documents will be very, very short-lived. And what you say, foresight, is going to make companies look into the area of anticipatory plans. You have to look ahead, and you can't be reactive. You can't just react, because if you have the lag time between the event and response, and many of us have been caught napping because COVID was something we never anticipated, and it couldn't have been, there wasn't any foresight really to anticipate such kind of tectonic shifts that the industry will undergo. So I think in the realm of having foresight and looking at strategic plans ahead of time, there'll be top 2 areas that the companies will really need to have a very deep dive. One would be to gain insights into the changing environment. So very often a company gets lost into its own brands and gets obsessed with its own products and its own, grand operating plans without looking at the changes in the environment, whether these are triggered by technology, competition, government, regulatory framework, etc., etc. So this love with self and staying within the perimeter of the company is not going to really help, and people need to look beyond the fence and see how the environment is really changing, and it is changing very rapidly. The second area the companies have to develop foresight about would be enhancing their own understanding of their customers' needs. Because the customers' patterns of buying, consuming, and what he expects as an experience from a brand or a product or a service have changed massively during the last few months. In 1.5 years, the adoption rate of many technologies, whether these are online purchasing, whether these are ordering patterns, consumption patterns, and you are seeing a lot of retail chains which don't have an online presence either shrinking or getting out of businesses. And therefore, the challenges in developing that anticipatory foresight are to understand the market complexity and the market predictability. And it's not easy. And there will be no one single way. A lot of companies will have open strategies which enable them to, switch from plan A to plan B. There will be a need for a lot of trials and experiments. And basis that, you do your scenario planning. So you have scenario A versus B. And as time unfolds, you will have to, not just be willing to pick B over A, but also run with both and create a hybrid model at some point in time. I think the key there would be that organizations need to be able to have processes which allow people to experiment and fail. And if the enabling environment of accepting failures in the organization is not strong, then companies will continue to struggle with templated structures, with legacy kind of strategy papers, and a lot of execution and the competitive edge will only stay as a dream for organizations. So that's my take on foresight and strategy as well.
What Mohan, I was getting and listening deeply to you that there is a rapid change happening around, and the organizations have developed the capability to anticipate the change, not just to respond to those changes, but anticipate and reinvent the future for themselves. Yeah. They're waiting to respond. So that's one of the key messages which was coming out, and which means that also there is a change in the customer behavior, there's a change in the way the markets are operating and behaving, and also while you're doing so, you have to enable your people. It means that everything is boiling down to the leadership and its concept behavior. So the answer of all those things is the leadership. Right. Now, if I may say it, that we are undergoing through a period of most rapid acceleration of creative destruction. It's a most rapid acceleration of creative destruction. Right. What it means for the leaders is that they have to keep recomposing, reinventing their leadership style. We will have to achieve the radical metamorphosis of our organizations while the race is in progress. Right. Nobody can drive now future on a cruise control mode, that you put the car in a cruise control and sleep. That's not possible. You have to be very vigilant all the time, keep anticipating, keep looking at what's happening, what's not happening. Will it take a special kind of leaders to succeed in this VUCA world? How would you like to define, reimagine, or recode business leadership in these disruptive times, Manmohan? Yeah.
I think, I would like to see the brighter side. What it will bring is a lot more emphasis on the humanities side and authentic leadership, which will rise to the occasion. Yeah. Leaders who have, amongst many things, I would say, very, very clear ability to collaborate internally and externally, have courage to deal with tough issues, at the same time, their ability to take self-care, because, let's also remember that when you demonstrate courage and you undertake very challenging missions for the organization, the leaders are also getting burnt. And they need to develop this skill to take care of themselves, because at every juncture they are required to kind of pull out from the reserves something extra. And as it is not a very normal ask for the organization, so mere courage and the ability to collaborate will not be enough. I think that calm resilience in leaders to be able to firstly take care. It's just like in the airlines, they announce first put your own mask before you attend to others around you. And that is something the leaders have to have the ability. Apart from the normal stuff that we spoke, what the company needs in terms of its purpose and vision. But I think the focus on personal vision of leaders in terms of the clarity it gives to the organization, and also helps building congruence of individuals' visions with that of the company's vision. But I think the two standout competencies of leaders which will help them navigate this is, one is creative thinking. They ought to not just think laterally and innovatively, but also need to do a lot of rethinking and reinventing, because there isn't a script to success. The second thing is the often beaten to death competence that we talk about, communication. If there was ever a time that you need to engage more and align constantly with all stakeholders in the organization, it is now. And therefore, the communication skills of the leaders and their firm belief in being inclusive, in not just understanding, but having a blueprint for sustainable development is what the authentic leaders will really stand out and give hope, and will give a lot of courage to the troops. End of the day, people don't measure authentic leadership with great oratory skills. They link it with credibility, and the credible leaders will exhibit all kinds of the requirements that people have post-pandemic in terms of seeing humanity, empathy, compassion. All of these things will be looked at by people beyond words. And therefore, the authentic leaders will certainly be able to provide direction to companies. And I see the silver lining, as I said at the beginning of this question, is that there will be a greater focus on humanity, something we haven't done as much in the last decade or 2 decades, focusing more on business results. And we've looked at ambition of the company far more than we've looked at the side, which will kind of move up to the level of compassion. So these are my views on what kind of leadership can steer companies through these troubled times.
So you rightly said, Manmohan, that first you take care of yourself and then the team. I mean, when you say you're saying that take care of yourself, means that you keep continually learning, unlearning, and relearning.
Yes.
And the workplaces are going to be more humane, more compassionate, focuses towards reaching this full potential of the human being, nurturing it. One of the I take it further, extend it a little bit more, Manmohan, that the major challenge for leaders always, has been how to release the brain power of the organization. And that is the current challenge and the most biggest challenge I feel. So I think it is an essential challenge for all the organization, and it is quite different challenge that faced with 20th century leaders, which was like you have to get productivity, but not the brain power so much. There are people, the general leader was a general, and the associates were troops. They have to follow the command. But now it is more of releasing the brain power. Now, what can the leaders do to ensure that their corporate culture will be a strategic asset rather than a change anchor, which stop the change or anchor the change itself? So, how organization can develop this kind of culture where the culture become a strategic asset for any organization? Over to you, Manmohan.
No, great question. And I think mere authority by the board is not going to serve leaders to navigate towards success, right? Leaders will very quickly understand that while the boards and the shareholders give them the authority, the real power to steer the company in the right direction comes from people who work with them, that they believe in his or her vision and are willing to, go beyond the normal and contribute towards the success of the organization. So I think the normal expectation that we used to have from traditional leaders will change. The leader will be the first among equals. It's like the chief justice amongst a quorum of many judges, or you could say the captain of a team, where the other 10 players in a cricket team, for example, are as important as the captain. The captain has to earn his place by actually performing and be somebody that the others will look up to and not be questioned for why is captaincy being given to somebody, and it's not related to age or somebody's tenure, etc., but real competence. And these are examples that we have seen, in sports, we have seen in very evolved institutions, and the concept will be that you will have very, very accomplished players or contributors, or you could say stars. And the leader's job would be to align them together, that he could really say that I've got a 8-point star or a 6-point star team. And the team is important. The leader's role will evolve into that of an influencer who is bridging silos within the organization. He has to understand, where the multiplication of results is going to be the maximum and reach out, and not necessarily by hierarchy, but the value some individual brings to that particular trade or sector. And he has to be somebody who is accessible, should have the ability to work many levels up and down in the organization, and people have to find him accessible, and thereby that's brain power or the full utilization of resources beyond just one or two key people who formulate strategy. I don't think that is going to really work. The leaders have to be more connected to the field, whether it's the shop floor workmen, or you have your salesmen, or you have the transaction analyst in a knowledge industry, and you can't really work through the spans of control. So leader is no longer a span breaker that you need. He has to add value, and he has to not be the mere aggregator of the sum of efforts of the rest of the organization. And it's his prime responsibility to tap into everybody's creativity, ability to do things differently, and thereby acting as a very, very trusted silo. He needs to have insights on, who is that individual who is successful in one part of the organization, but has the necessary skill sets and the attitude to succeed in another part of the organization. Not necessarily another geography, but in completely different function altogether. So the leader has to have the vision on who are my people whose likely success or whose likely portability of success is higher, so as to transplant those better performing or better role models across the organization. And therefore, it's not going to be a question of couple of brains deciding the future of the company, but you have to harness far many or as many people as you can. Yeah, Anil.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're saying that leaders is not something will be known by the authority, but contribution. And there will be distributed leadership.
Yes.
Everywhere we will have leaders and they're autonomous. Now,
I'll give you an example. Let me, I'm sorry to.
Please. No, absolutely.
Organizations which invested in great talent to have solid regional heads, state heads, plant heads, etc., saw the benefit of that in the pandemic, where these local leaders were able to take decisions on whether they want to run, they don't want to run, how to kind of distribute people across shifts, across markets, etc. And they were decisive, and they were very, very clear of the kind of risk they wouldn't like their teams to be exposed to. Now, if you have a completely centralized organization where in the chain of command, every single decision is going to be taken centrally by the headquarters, the decisions could be suboptimal and individuals could have paid price with their life. And, this is what companies have seen the advantage of investing in very distributed leadership.
Absolutely. So, Manmohan, it is about diffused power, diffused authority. And it is not about decentralization, but non-centralized organization. What we are moving not towards decentralized, but non-centralized organizations, I would rather say, where the units are independent, autonomous, and they can take their decisions within the boundaries, of course, which we have decided.
Yes.
And that advantage the organizations have reaped during this pandemic.
Absolutely.
Right now, when we are building such organization which is very non-centralized, more humane, compassionate, leadership are distributed. It is not general versus troops. One of the things which you mentioned earlier, that empathy becomes very, very important aspect of it. Unless you are very empathetic, you would not be able to run the organization of equals, of leaders of leaders. So they need to be very empathetic. So empathy has become a very vital virtue for the leaders in these challenging times. And managing hybrid teams, this kind of work environment, will require absolute new skills and change in the mindset of leadership now, as you have mentioned. The empathy plays a very, very critical role in the journey of leadership. I want you to a little bit more deep dive on the concept of the empathy, because we know that you've been a very empathetic leader throughout your journey. So we would like to know from your experiences also, and how you want to leaders to help them to become more empathetic and highlight the importance of empathy in the workplace of 21st century.
Yeah, and it's not going to be an easy journey, because an organization is always a commercial setup where shareholders have invested, and there are returns and profitability which are often regarded as the key objectives and the purpose of a company to deliver back to the shareholders. And therefore, to now bring in the concept which is not just the responsibility and the onus of the CEO and the HR organization to demonstrate empathy, but I think the opportunity is to empower every line manager, every supervisor in the traditional definition of a supervisor, to be able to understand his team members better. And empathy has to rise to the level of compassion for people, not merely lip service of saying, yeah, if I was in your shoes, I would have also done so. I mean, it can uh, perhaps serve one conversation, second conversation, but people will know that you've got a script for everybody to say the same things. So what are you doing in terms of enabling this individual who has anxieties, who has been through a certain trauma or crisis, or has been a bystander of crisis in his social circle, family, etc.? Are you willing to, understand if there is a need for his role revision, his job description, his annual goals, his bonus targets, etc.? Because end of the day, the authenticity of the leader, gets measured by an individual by the kind of support he gets from his supervisor or his manager, and not just by pep talks or being sponsored for any kind of counseling. I mean, that is a recourse which is available to many on a personal basis, and the individual doesn't need companies' sponsorship always, right? So the manager is expected to be able to correlate towards whether the goals are in line with what the individual is today, uh, you know, in a frame of mind to deliver. Uh, is there need for calibration of anything around his goals, his deliverables, his bonus, etc., his anxiety about his salary increment, etc.? The second bit, people still have this great expectation that, I will be valued. And to be valued, his past experience has to be taken into account and utilized. And also, if there are opportunities to grow, he has to be at least provided with the necessary framework of personal development so that he can then, correlate his development with the growth opportunities in the company. And finally, people, ask themselves, am I valued in this company? Do I belong here? Does my supervisor, is he bothered about me? So these are questions which are the broad framework of empathy. And in terms of the hierarchy or the proficiency levels that you get, the deeper you get, the more the chances that the empathy will go towards a level of compassion in the organization, whilst keeping in mind that we are still, or companies are still, a commercial organization, but it has to make some allowance for people who have not been through a normal situation. And the closest parallel I can see is, I used to run a couple of factories in the 90s for PepsiCo in Punjab, and Punjab had just come out of terrorism at that point in time. And we had processes, policy, facilities, benefits, insurances, etc., to cater to the kind of things people had gone through in terrorism. I mean, in our contract labor pool, we had reformed terrorists through some voluntary organizations. And versus, doing your CSR payouts, if you do a deeper work, the empathy gets, entrenched into the organization, and you create a greater goodwill with the surrounding environment. And those bonds are extremely strong and lifelong.
I mean, Manmohan, it's fantastic. I mean, empathy is the core. And what I'm getting from you, that you said that when you value someone,
yeah,
the first condition is that the organizations which are empathetic organizations, the leaders who are empathetic, empathy starts from the customer and goes to your suppliers, employees, and then your stakeholders, not just balancing the interest of the stakeholders, but all these four
so
unemployed,
great,
and then,
great
then
point.
extending it to the societal level, as you rightly said, that you could even transform some of the terrorists into the productive employee. Looking at what external environment is and how to respond that. One
No,
of the
I'll
things
give you
is, yeah,
another example, Anirudh. In the recent pandemic, um, my own organization where I was working categorized the vendors and suppliers into ABC, saying which are those vendors which are likely to collapse if you don't make their past payments versus the big players who have the ability to sustain 6 months, 12 months. And then you kind of rationalize and prioritize to these players. For example, if you have a corrugation box supplier who is on a very thin margin and may just fall off the cliff and shut down his business, is the one you should pay more versus a large supplier who's a multinational company across the globe. And then you have to engage with them in terms of ensuring that his facilities don't shut down forever. So beyond employees, these are examples that we have all seen.
what a fantastic example of being empathetic organizations, that not only to the only employees, customers, or the stakeholders, but suppliers and society at large. Now, the dichotomy of the situation, Manmohan, is that one side we are talking about more compassionate, empathetic, and being very close to the people's heart, more compassionate organization, more human organization.
Yeah.
Now there's a technology changes is completely having, and with the event of artificial intelligence, emotional AI with emotions, machine learning, and Internet of Things, human machines collaboration is going up. Robotics, blockchain, enable the new technology platforms. Now things are coming like that, sales becoming contactless. And moving online platform to service like e-fitting rooms.
Yeah.
Right? The change is evident across industries if you look. More and more personal contact is getting lesser and lesser and lesser. We are now talking over the Zoom. Now, in such environments, how do you think that what is the importance of technology taking a competitive advantage for an organization, and how it will impact long-term strategy of the organization? And will it be a more of tactical element in the organization, or it is going to be the impacting the strategy itself and course of the organization?
No, I think there can be no business plan when we spoke about, forecasting strategies and anticipating changes, etc. In any business plan, any strategy, I don't expect the first point to be anything else than the technology adoption plans for the organization, whether you call it a digital journey, you call it transformation of IT, you can give any such name, because there is no part of our life, there is no sector which is not touched, and the companies simply cannot afford not to be in this journey of massive and fast transformation from wherever their current IT skill sets and their technology platforms are, and they have to be willing to find monies from other places that they could perhaps cut and invest in being ahead of the curve. It's a huge strategic advantage, competitive advantage between two firms of similar kind of capabilities. I think technology and culture are the only two differentiators that the companies can hope to invest from future-proofing themselves. And we are seeing every organization today has a digital transformation strategy. The boards are getting very intimately involved in not just hearing about these journeys, but also the progress of the company in its journey. And it's no longer a choice. I mean, if you choose to compete in the world today, which is challenging, then without technology, it is not possible at all.
So technology is not just tactical, but it is a core of the strategy, and it is the completely source of advantage. The quintessential for success. Very well said, Manmohan. Now it is a time for rapid fire. Rapid fire is will be taken by Manish, and every question will have 15-second, 20-second response time, and 5 minutes will wrap up, and then we'll have audience questions.
Okay.
And so this is how we are going ahead. It is going to be a very interesting round.
Fine.
And Manish, over to you.
Thank you, Anirudh. Very interesting insights, Manmohan. You have actually wrapped up your 30 years of experience in 30 minutes. That's interesting. So as the title suggests, rapid fire. So we would expect you to answer these questions. These are small answer questions. You have to answer in one word to one sentence.
Yeah.
Feel like going beyond that to do justice to any particular question, please feel free. So here comes the first one. How do we go about our mental models into ones that are more systemic in nature so that we can learn to look at the whole organization and not just at some part of it that needs to be fixed?
Yeah. I think cross-functional mindset and a cross-organizational understanding is where people will be seen to be more effective versus the others. The onus is on the individual to learn as much about other parts of the organization. So my view is that it's an absolutely necessary trait to have, and organizations should also spot these.
Absolutely, absolutely. The next one is what would be your key message to leaders today to help them start reimagining and decoding the future of their organizations?
So my key message is to, and especially for HR, is to develop deeper understanding of your own colleagues, your own employees. For business leaders is to value people, right? It's not about we paid people, everybody was paid salary, we also gave increments. That's a very old style, sympathetic view of people. The newer style is, are you welcoming them back with open arms, making them feel very valued, and still having opportunities to develop themselves?
Right, right. Going beyond the given. Yeah. The next one is if traditional concept of management is reaching the end of the road, will there be any role at all for the managers and for hierarchy in the future organizations?
Yeah, we touched a little bit of this in a previous question where, the future leader or the supremo of the organization would be more like, the first amongst equals rather than an authority figure who's only there to command, So teams will change. You will see far more collaborative organization, and the role of leaders will also change, and most of it will be through positive affirmative steps. I don't expect any need to read the Riot Act anywhere, because I think what we've gone through is an experience of a century or multiple centuries, and this will certainly give wisdom to people to make the course corrections on an affirmative, personal basis, taking their own initiative.
Great, well addressed. The next one, the fourth one is what is the key to building an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative ecosystem or economic system, as we may say it in today's parlance?
Okay, too many terms there, but I think the key would be enhancing your understanding. So if you are in a particular area, do you understand your environment around you? if you're in a particular sector, do you understand other players around you? And the concept of sustainable environment will be a kind of a binding force in it, as much as it will be the concept of diversity and inclusivity. So on these two planks, you will be able to achieve these grand objectives.
Absolutely. The next one, though you have touched upon during your conversation with Anirudh, still let me ask, how do you define importance of values like humility and empathy for a future fit leader?
I think extremely important. And I personally feel a lot of people are going to question their own career journeys after this crisis settles down. People will start asking themselves, am I really spending time in the right organization? Are my organization's values, my team members' values, my leaders' values matching those of mine? And therefore, the premium on people who understand empathy, people who understand humanity, people who will understand what credible, authentic, genuine leadership uh, is, will be very high. I mean, we have all worked in companies, and it doesn't take you long to differentiate between a fake and a real leader. And going forward, people wouldn't want to stay with fake teams or fake leaders for the sake of just having a job, because I think there will be a lot of awakening of purpose in individuals. And therefore, this element of having a higher purpose and defining the place of humanity and compassion and empathy in the organization will be extremely important.
Absolutely. It was always important. It has become more important in today's parlance. Absolutely. The next one is define new age skill sets needed for a leader to survive and thrive beyond COVID 19. This is a special situation, of course.
So, new age skills remain, agility, they remain creative thinking. Uh, they would remain as, ability to communicate across. And I would say that the 21st century skills will look beyond technical skills, look beyond behavioral skills and life skills, but encompass a lot of things which people, classify as passion, hobbies, interests, and those are things I would encourage, leaders and future managers to continue to invest in themselves.
Absolutely. The next one comes a leadership approach that puts purpose and people at the heart of business. Your views on these things in brief.
Well, I've been a very, very strong believer of it all my life. And, there isn't another way I can imagine an organization. There isn't another place that I would imagine myself being, except where this is at the heart of, the organization. And that sums the purpose of a very large part of people who are today here in this conversation. We all firmly believe in people, and that's why we've chosen to invest our careers in this function of human resources. And it's a mission statement. For me, it's the functional integrity for what at least I exist in the function.
It says it all. Next one. Leaders must think deeply and manage their emotions in intense situations, all while stakeholders expect to see results. So leaders are always at some or the other crossroads. So please throw light briefly on this.
Yeah, this is a dilemma that will constantly challenge people in their career journeys, this balance in organizational goals and the expectations of stakeholders around profitability, etc., and to balance it with the human element, you know. will always be a challenge. So I think a deeper understanding of self is the key to be able to help your team members or the organization, because unless you understand what are your own trigger points and what you do to others, you will not be able to really help the organization. So I think a very deep and a good understanding of self, and thereafter, building those equations with the other team members and having a blueprint for the organization will help keeping this balance between personal emotions and the commercial aspects of the organization.
Aptly answered. Aptly answered. The next one is what have been key learnings for you during the pandemic in terms of leadership?
I have been, and I'm not going to talk about the dark side and the bad side. We all have read and seen enough. I'm going to talk about the positives and the good things that, the crisis has thrown up. Firstly, I saw a lot of leadership from very unknown quarters in my own organization. I have seen people who put their hand up and said, okay, for example, if there is a shortage, early in the pandemic, there was a huge shortage of masks, if you remember, and we could manage a consignment landing in Mumbai. And mind you, we had some 30 locations pan India to look after. And, the people who put their hand up that, okay, I'm going to do the logistics for the milk run, starting Mumbai, coming down south, going to east, and all the way to the north to do this. And, so we've seen leadership uh, voluntarily coming up from the masses in this pandemic. Second, I think the greater bondings, the genuine bondings have happened between teams, even though they are in dispersed locations. So you have a regional head in a particular city whose state heads are in another state, and within that state, the district headquarters have various team members. They can't meet physically versus the earlier time, but still now the amount that they know about each other, their families, their value systems is far more. So I think the pandemic has served a huge warning to people that, if life is very mechanical and transactional, then, we will lose touch with each other. And it has taught us some very, very relevant uh, uh, lessons which shouldn't be forgotten once the pandemic is over.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The last one, what thought would you leave with today's leaders to prepare them for the challenges of tomorrow?
So I think by and large, the leaders of today are smarter than leaders of my era, and with each decade, you are seeing a greater, a sharper set of managers coming in. And I think the one lesson that they can remember is that what you learn in a crisis is something that serves you for a lifetime, right? And when I gave the example of Punjab, is something I'd seen in the 90s, but helped me to correlate, though that was on a much smaller scale, and the pandemic was on a very higher scale. So I think the lesson you have to remember is that crisis will never come with a warning. If there is an experience, try and remember what you did right and avoid the mistakes you did in the previous occasion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Wonderful learning insights from whatever discussion we had so far. Still, some guests have some questions that they want to
Sure.
ask. So over to Anirudh to put a
So yeah, the note you ended, Manish, Manmohan, that never let the crisis go in waste.
Yeah.
There are some great lessons, and we should must learn it and implement them, embedded them, and make them take advantage of that. So crisis also brings the opportunity. That's very, very right. So we've been talking about success and problems, etc. Now, one of the questions which have been put up is, what does unsuccessful leadership look like?
Okay, when I spoke about the Punjab experience, I must also tell you that some of the other events I have witnessed are the Gujarat riots, etc., etc. And basis whatever I have seen, I think one common characteristic of, I wouldn't say unsuccessful. Somebody else could label them to be very successful career professionals. But I would say people who weren't found credible in those situations. One of the common trait exhibited is a panic these people had. And one is that you admit to your team saying, well, we haven't seen anything like this. So is there anything we can do together to get out of this situation? The other is to, completely panic and kind of abdicate responsibility. So if you closely watch leaders who have this tendency to be great as long as the script is holding right for them, but panic in the wake of a crisis, not necessarily a COVID pandemic, but any kind of unusual circumstances, whether there's a cyclone coming or there is a natural disaster or riots in the city, etc. The common theme I have seen is their tendency to panic and start abdicating responsibility and not take accountability of the situation at hand.
Very good. Stop panicking. So how does, that's another question. So how does advisor and CHRO facilitate your role, basically? They are talking about your role, that you being in a CHRO, now advisors. So how it facilitate your role in the organization? How?
It's a transition for me. After a very satisfying 32 years of a very operations-oriented career, I am taking some breathing time and involved with only very, very key initiatives which are strategic. And I'm also involved beyond the organization in creation of a few institutions, which is a passion. And I mentioned to both Anirudh and Manish that I'm not into teaching. It's just the framework of how a university should really evolve, or how a learning academy should really be shaped in its founding stage. So while I couldn't muster courage and become a founder for my own initiative, I take out time and am working very closely with a couple of founders who are starting their great initiatives, which are very promising. And I don't have a formal role with them, but those keep me very occupied. And it's a transition I haven't fully mastered, to be very honest. And but it gives me great breathing time to evaluate what I would like to do next in the next 5-10 years. And I think I still have some reserves to depend on and contribute back to the function.
There are a lot of interesting questions. So one of the things our great friend Vijaya has put in is that a lot is going to change, and so is leadership of the future. One of the most pressing demands on leaders is to transform their companies to adopt a new bionic business operating model. So bionic, we call it business operating model. This will perhaps be the most urgent and will require them to lead in new ways. What do leaders really need to do? What are your top ideas?
No, I think the seasoned individuals who are secure with themselves will contribute in this journey of reshaping and helping companies transform into their evolving strategies and into the evolving marketplace complexities. And and there are plenty of very, very talented leaders across every function and across every level. You have CEO level, CXO level, business leaders. And I think in India, we are very privileged that our pool of tenured, experienced leaders is so huge that we can all multiply our forces and help organizations to be on their transformation journey. I don't see a huge challenge. I think all it needs is more collaboration outside and beyond the company. And there are enough and more people who are willing to, offer an advice or look at the plans. And therefore, I think India is very privileged to have a very large pool of very accomplished leaders who will help the India Inc. to its journey in the transformational era.
Fantastic. So another question is that what are the key drivers that are going to shape the business strategies of tomorrow from a leadership standpoint?
So we've already covered what leaders need to do in terms of having courage, in terms of good communication skills and compassion, etc. And I think the single differentiator would be the collaboration skills of leaders, not just within their teams, but with the stakeholders beyond their operating team, whether it's the board or it is the industry forums, and so that it becomes a movement and not just a business plan for a company.
So the last question that from the audience: what could leaders in the organizations can do on the targets? Leaders have targets, but due to the COVID-19, especially like hospitality and airlines, these targets have gone for they cannot achieve because these are the situation where it's beyond their control. Yeah. How they keep themselves and employees, their associates motivated in this time of COVID and crisis when there are no targets or they're not able to do any kind of business due to the pandemic. Yeah.
Very good. I think it's a great question because the organization may have been idle for a particular period in time, but will not be expected to be idle forever. Because if that's the case, then the organization doesn't have a purpose to exist. And therefore, how do you make use of the time? I think successful companies, and we've made efforts in our own organization, is to utilize this time on people development. So, for example, we could take our assessment centers and development centers down to the level of every single sales field manager during this pandemic, because otherwise it's very difficult to pull them out from their day-to-day roles and bring them to a central location. So we found ways with consulting organizations who were able to do these online. And so you ran assessments and you created their development plans and you worked on people's development and be ready for the market as and when it opens up. Not having targets doesn't mean that the organization is in a state of flux and you don't have to engage with people. I think it has been a unfortunate period where there was no business activity. At the same time, for the HR functions, and this is very selfish way of looking at the pandemic, the HR got so much of time from its people that it could work on not just creating engagement and alignment in the organization, but particularly on the developmental side, some very deep work has happened across many, many organizations. And this will pay the rewards and reap benefits for the company as and when there is normalcy of business. And therefore, companies should utilize and make use of this time very, very strategically into their key resources.
With this question, we are come to end to the session. Manmohan ji, it was a fantastic session. I must pay my gratitude to my participants who are always there to encourage us, listen us, and thank you very much for being with us.
It's been a pleasure, Anirudh, speaking to you and Manish, and I would like to thank everyone who has had the patience to listen and took out time from their busy schedule. So thank you, everybody, and wishing you the success with your future.
Good night to all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manmohan ji. Thank you, all the audience.
Manish, can you end the meeting?
Okay. Thanks.